everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the Safe House Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the Safe House Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. A couple of months ago, if you remember, we had Mark Sangster, who's the chief of strategy for Adlumin, on, and we talked about basically the ABCs of MDR. Managed detection response. And it was very enlightening to all of us. And we had a lot of great feedback on this particular episode. And the one thing everybody took hold of is said, hey, when's Mark coming back to tell us those stories he suggested, those war stories? And I said, well, soon, I hope. And so sure enough, let's welcome back Mark. Mark, it's great to have you back, buddy.
Hey, Jeff. Well, thanks very much for the kind comments and feedback that you had from your listeners. But so I am all set to go. I've got a whole handful of stories here for you.
Excellent. All right, so let's for the listeners that 2 months ago or 3 months ago, whatever it was, let's refresh everybody's memory, and for the new listeners, what MDR is. And then we can go into some of those stories. And I think that it's going to really bring a lot of color and life to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So MDR is managed detection and response. So what that means is, as a turnkey kind of service on a 24/7 basis around the clock, the MDR vendor is monitoring or watching your environment, right? So, endpoint and cloud and your network and so on, and looking for suspicious activity, right? Whatever that is, an alert from a firewall or something else that tells them they think something bad is going on, to investigate that, whatever they find, and then to respond, right? And response, in my mind, the minimum is their ability to contain the threat on your behalf. So you should never have to push the button or log in. They should be able to do it for you. That's MDR to me.
Yeah, and it also kind of helps with third-party risk management. It really is very helpful for smaller to mid-sized type companies. Because it scales, it provides a level of ability that they wouldn't provide on their own because of their budgets and things of that nature. Is that correct, if I remember right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Right. So you're right. It's sort of it's a cost palatable model that's, less than a head count to effectively provide what a team of people would be required to do that. And we see it across all sorts of industries, right? It's not restricted to just, highly regulated like banking or healthcare. We see it in, manufacturing, business services like law firms, architecture firms, engineering, schools, K-12s, universities are all adopting it. Utilities, right? Utilities and municipalities and all of that sort of within their circle, emergency services and transportation and all of that, they are all picking up MDR because the size of their business is limited, right? There's effectively a small to medium sized business. They don't have the financial and budgetary and resource capacity that, a large bank would. So they're looking for some way to secure themselves, but, not break the bank.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to sit back and relax. Grab a cup of coffee if you're listening, because we're going to go on storytelling time. So these are all events that you've lived through, Mark, or have been closely associated with?
I have. Yeah. So that's right. Or I've either been directly in the investigation team or providing some sort of support with them. So that's included things like ransomware attacks. So companies unfortunately been shut down by ransomware and coming in after the fact. Nation state attacks against organizations where they are targeting specific individuals or targeting specific information, and then also some really clever con jobs that were pulled on companies to get them to pay a lot of money. And that was all done by, the sort of more advanced and experienced cyber criminals.
All right, so start with your most entertaining, and then we'll work into some of the most applicable. How's that?
Yeah. Okay. So let's come out of the gate with a bang, right? So I'm going to talk about a manufacturing firm that was targeted by ransomware. They were shut down at the height of Conti. So Conti at one point, CONTI, it's just their name. We in cybersecurity, we give all threat groups, we give them cool code names like we're spies or something along those lines. But anyway, they were attacked by Conti at their height. They were shut down over a weekend, and it was discovered by an IT person who was trying to run some updates and patches on the Sunday, couldn't access their network remotely, so ended up driving into the office to do that. When he arrived at the office, he realized he couldn't log into most of the systems. Everything seemed to be gone, and then he found the notes, right? It was just a text file explaining how to connect and say, basically, we've shut you down, we've stolen everything, wiped it all. We want $5 million in cryptocurrency. Yeah. So that's when I came into it. So their organization was absolutely down. They couldn't do anything. They were, like I said, they were a manufacturer. So, they have, while they're a company you'd never have heard of, all their customers are big manufacturing type of firms that you have heard of, and you either wear their product or live in their product or drive their product. So they're that kind of core ecosystem type of player. So it wasn't just them really. In fact, it was less them. It was more about all of their customers that would be impacted.
Yeah.
And so when this went down, the CEO owned the company, which was probably good in a lot of ways because the kind of governance as a sole proprietor is a lot different than if you were sitting in a public company with a board and the SEC, staring at you, waiting for you to make a mistake.
Yeah.
He sort of stepped up. And what I was impressed with was that he quickly went from sort of the ego-driven, or fear-driven anger to, all right, what do we do about it? And at one point he said, it is costing us, $650,000 or something like that, $700,000 a day that we are down, just for our core business.
Yeah.
So when he, realized they were asking about paying $5 million, he's like, fine, I'm going to pay it, because that's like a week's worth of loss. So in his mind, paying the ransom, and getting the decryption keys would get him up and running sooner. He was willing to do that. Now, the challenge was that, we did slow him down enough to get him to contact his insurer, and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So the insurer brought in a company to negotiate the ransom. They brought in a company to do the incident, response investigation, which was a lot of, it can't be contained anymore because they've destroyed your environment, but let's see what they did, what they touched, any forensics that could be collected, and primarily not for a law enforcement response, but more for, the insurer, right? Were you doing what you're supposed to do, all that kind of stuff. And so they brought those firms in. The CEO not only was, like I said, he was sort of this sole proprietor and a pretty ambitious guy, but he also was quite large. And so he was a bouncer back in college. And so in his mind, he wanted to do this like mano a mano and, go fly to Russia with a bag full of 500,000, or 500 million or 5 million, and, go face these guys across a boardroom table, drink some vodka and fly home, and we're all like, no, dude, this is not how this works. Like, buy a one-way ticket, make sure your insurance is, up before you leave. Right.
Yeah.
Because you're not coming home, and that's if you could even find them. So, we sort of had to talk him out of that, but there was a lot of interesting things that occurred. So number one, as I said, short part of this. Number one, they ended up paying $5.5 million on what had become a $4.5 million ransom payment. We still can't explain that, how the broker did that. And I remember sitting with my crypto wallet and opening it and showing them the markets to say, like, nothing has increased by 20%. I wish it had, but it hadn't. And this was, when crypto was really, depressed in value. Their lawyer kind of didn't do a great job because their lawyer, I think, was sort of beaten down a little bit by the CEO. So when the CEO would make a suggestion that was really a bad idea, not good for the business, the lawyer would go, well, you could do that, but, and then, trying to get into the explanation. And of course that he just got shut down. And so as an example, they started paying the ransom before they got have approval by the insurer, and the insurer just uses it as an excuse to say, like, look, like, we didn't approve this. We could have negotiated it down farther, whatever. So we're not covering it. And as it turned out, they got about $1 million back in insurance. So they did certainly stand the 5-day loss. But here's where it got worse. The company was then sold about a year later. And this was, like $1 billion kind of deal. And they lost, I think, about 10% of that value when the due diligence work discovered this breach, and they realized how bad it was, because it was all down to fundamentals. Like, they did not have a lot of the fundamentals in place, which is pretty typical. And I would say that this business, like others, suffers when, you kind of have you grow up as friends, the CEO is like, hey, computers, I'll hire you. And, it's really nice. But the problem is, you get to some kind of scale all of a sudden, and it's like, now you've got this big ship at sea, and none of you are professional, maritimers. So, you're great with with your 30-foot boat on a lake, but, now you're in the middle of the Atlantic in a storm. And I think that's where, that's where they struggled. Right. But, all the basics could have really stopped this. And I almost use it in detail as a textbook case of, like, all the things not to do. The prevention, the response, the paying the wrong way, not involving the insurers. They never did call the police either. They kept it quiet because the owner didn't want it to become public.
Yeah, his reputation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you find that to be the case in a lot of situations, or is it becoming now it's better to come clean and be transparent, even though it may impact you a little bit, but it's probably better to be transparent or not?
So it used to absolutely be, if I have to, I will, and if I'm not being forced to, I'm not going to. Forget it.
Yeah.
It's so the only people who are coughing anything up are regulated industry, right? Public companies, financial companies, healthcare facilities, but nobody else was really doing it unless they were a big brand name, maybe, right? But it's becoming more of people sort of understanding how to craft the message, and we should probably tell them, because I also think too it's becoming, man, I wouldn't say it's normalized, but it's becoming an everyday event. So I think there's less of the shame around it, right? Or even the sense of like sort of legal risk, you know what I mean? That it's like liability, that it's like, oh man, if we say anything, this is going to blow up in our face. I think those kind of things that sentiment has changed.
Well, it's also getting to a point where it could be an advantage, because if you do it correctly and do it well, then it's something to say, hey, I withstood an attack and we handled it very well. And so they could be turned the other way in a positive way.
I agree, right? I think there is that, outbound or sort of marketing kind of approach now, right? To sort of say, yeah, look, this is what happened, and you're right. And a company should be proud of saying, they cleaned up spilled milk all day. It's good. If it's never getting any worse than that, great, right? That's a badge of honor. That's not, it doesn't make you sound like you're klutzy. Yeah. So it has changed, but it's still, what I see now is that the regulated companies are very, restrictive or narrow-minded in how they have to apply that. And, I don't blame them, right? They're trying not to set a foot wrong. But in smaller companies, it's, more now the challenge becomes, well, like, okay, how do we tell people, how do we do this, and what should we say, and what's going to make it, what do we not want to do to make it worse?
All right. So you started off with a bang with an ex-bouncer that was going to go to Russia and beat people up with a $5 million briefcase. I love that image. So take us on another adventure, please.
Yeah. So this one was a nation state attack. So, this is where you literally have the Russian government or the Chinese government or somebody, their military, their intelligence agencies coming after you. And it turned out, to set the stage, there was a gentleman who was emigrating from China, and he was, so he was coming to America, and he's a wealthy individual. And so, he had to go through things like, immigration law. So he had lawyers for that. He had, lawyers to whatever, figure out, how do I land my helicopter, and, how do I pay for my, penthouse in the Upper West Side, all that kind of stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So they're dealing with this. And it turned out that this billionaire had been pretty vocal against the Chinese, the People's Republic government. Right. They were really, they were challenging. And so because of that, they had labeled him a dissident and a traitor.
Really?
And they had actually on social media and through, their official channels said, this guy's, effectively an enemy of the state. He's betrayed, China, and he's going to be punished, but anyone who helps him will be punished. And so unfortunately, the law firm involved was the ones that took the punches. And it turned out that the criminals, the criminals, in this case, the nation state actors, were able to fish some of their senior partners, managing partners. They were able to eventually get into the environment, full access of the environment. They were going through specific files. They were looking for all of this person, the client information. They were stealing information. So anything they found around, M&A, IP patents, filings, things like that, they were stealing and copying. And then worse, the partners who were involved in supporting this guy, they were planting information on their computers that, like, let's just say if, people were to find those pictures or videos, you'd be charged, right? You go to jail, you go to prison, you'd likely end up divorced, and you'd definitely be fired. So it's it's like, that's the kind of burn, scorched earth kind of game they were playing. Now, we caught them. It was interesting. We spotted some weird traffic. So we didn't get them right away. We caught them, we saw this going on, and we started to investigate. That's when we shut everything down. We were also able to log and pull all the stuff. So, anything, like I said, compromising information, files and photos and stuff that have been left on these systems, we could demonstrate came from wherever they came from, because they didn't have time to wipe logs and do all that. So we could show that, like, this was planted evidence, right? We also were able to explain exactly what happened, what information was touched. And because of that, the State Department came in. And there was some of us called into the boardroom kind of thing. And, it's what you expected, right? Men in black, all have the same name. They all John Smith. And they took everything we had. And then they, all the forensics we had, and they just asked a bunch of questions. They never answered anything. And then that was it. They left. Right. And the firm afterwards told us that they were using, this was all kind of going into the file, right? You know what I mean? Is so that at what point, someone along the lines will decide that, that makes a really good slap or response or ante or something like that they could use. So, but then the other part of this was that the client then sued the law firm, and he sued on grounds of three things. And one was breach of contract because they fired him as a client. The second one was the damage that was done by this hack. And I can't remember the third one, but it was something along those lines, right? So it was the security was inferior. That's what it was, right? That they didn't have the right security in place. So when a judge looked at it, it turned out that he kept all but one sort of not charge, right? But in a civil court, like I guess one reason for the trial or for the lawsuit. So he threw out the security one because the law firm actually was able to demonstrate that they caught it within 8 hours in this case. They were also able to demonstrate that within seconds they did something about it, that they collected all the information, and they were able to use industry research that said, look, here's, a survey from an association in legal technology. And we have, way more we're doing more on security in terms of budget and tools and technology and people than the average law firm is. So like we were doing our job. And then the second part, the damages, he didn't think the judge could think he could prove it. This guy's still living on his, 200-foot yacht and whatever, right? He doesn't look like he's hard done for. Nobody even knows he exists. The second one, and then the last one, right, was the breach of contract. And that's where he got them, because in the contract, he had stipulated clearly that none of his information was to be able to put into any digital form. It cannot be on the internet, cannot be on their network. It had to remain paper. Yeah. And of course, it happens, right? You're like, yeah, that's great. You sign the deal or the retainer, and then, lawyers, whatever, their assistants go through the standard operating procedure, which is, every document becomes digitized, sits in a doc resource management system or document control system, with a case file and all that. Right. So we see things like this, like that. But then there's also, Jeff, like there's stories like working with a hedge funds, like a financial institution on Wall Street, or, actually in Midtown nowadays. And they were setting up a new office. And I don't know if for those of you who've ever been in a hedge fund, right? Hedge fund is investment for really rich people. So, they have what they call limited partners, that their investors are coming in with, 150 million, 200 million that they're putting into their fund.
Like you.
Oh yeah, 100% like me. Yeah. I'm part of 5 or 6 of them. Yeah, that's right. I made my money in railways and horse crops, and and then so when you think about like the clientele you're bringing in, typically staff in the office, the receptionist, things like that are going to be models and actors, right? Yeah. Regardless of their gender, right? It doesn't matter. The artwork, it's not going to be the fake Picasso. It's going to be the real Picasso. Right. Or it's some famous local artist, whatever. Right. So the point is they doll them up. So this company became victim when the spouse of the managing partner, she was going to be the decorator. Right. So she was buying the furniture and the artwork and all that kind of stuff. And somewhere along the lines, when we believed it was at a Starbucks in the building lobby, she got spearphished, really. Right. They targeted her. They were able to compromise her credentials. They got into like her bank account, her Gmail, her Apple account with credit cards, all that stuff, right? And so that was fine. But then these guys were smart. I think they read the emails and they saw what was going on, and they saw her doing all this stuff. So rather than, trying to defraud whatever minimum or max they could get out of it, they decided to pretend to be the art dealer. They started sending her invoices, and the invoices were coming from... Yeah, the classic, like you change the domain name so it's 2 N's instead of an M, that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. But because they were in her email, they knew all the details, like, numbers, all that kind of stuff, and prices, photographs, all that. So like they literally did a stellar job of, fake invoicing. The wife would forward them on to the boss would pay them, and they were out about $450,000 before they realized what was going on.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And so, so that's a more advanced version of, right, what we'd call business email compromise or fake invoicing, right, or whatever you want to say, right? It's not the junky, you got to send $5,000 to China if you want to trademark your name or something like that. That was a good targeted one, right? Where they were, played a little longer and less, sort of, getting the immediate gratification of just, trying to get $500 out of her account or $1,000 or something, playing that one out was smart. And I've seen that as well at the industrial level, like, for example, 200 and something law firms and a couple of state Supreme Courts were affected by clever criminals who contacted the lawyers, senior lawyers, looking for a mentor. And they claimed to be with a law program at a, prestigious school. They were in their final year, they got to do this. And so they did. And they communicated with these victims for about a couple of weeks. And then after a couple of weeks of back and forth, they then sent them an email thanking them and then asking if they could, complete there was a link to a survey. Could they complete the survey so that they could get academic credit? And when they clicked on the survey link, it went to a page that looked like, it was Harvard or whatever. And it had all the right information in it, and they filled it out. But of course, it asked them to log in as well. And criminals were relying on the fact that they would use the same password for that as they would for, their email and so on. And that's exactly how they got in. And it was the same thing. They were stealing information and they were dropping ransomware. So a genius play in that one, right? I think that's a tough one. And I've stood in hospitals and like, well, how would you test? How would you hack us? I'm like, it's simple, man. I go to a local law firm. I Google which one deals with malpractice that you guys would know. I'm going to find a public court record that they managed. I'm going to go and manipulate the PDF to change the information in it. Put your name on it and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to send it to your doctors that you all have listed on your website, to your heads of departments, and tell them that they're being sued by, whoever, right? Mark Smith or Sally Jane for whatever form of malpractice. And I was like, I guarantee you're going to open that. You're going to click on it until, and that's all I need, right? I can go from there. I don't need you. You can get onto page 2 of the purported, filing and realize that it's garbage, right? It doesn't make any sense. But it's all that emotional response. So yeah, they're really good at, like I said, they're going after specific people, broad industry. And when they're doing it, it's either an espionage kind of, they're trying to poison the well or steal critical info, or they're just shutting us down as just economic punishment.
Wow. Even more need to have an MDR service in place, or at least be managing and detecting the best you can. Holy cow.
Yeah. And it gives you the idea of, the sophistication. And I kind of try to paint it like this. Cyber criminals are like master chefs, right? They could take the basic stuff in your kitchen, some protein like a chicken and, salt and, fat and some vegetables and all that kind of stuff, and cook you like a delicious meal, 5-star Michelin star kind of meal. So it's not just the ingredients. The ingredients, better quality is probably going to give you a better meal, but it's also their ability to mix and match and put all that together to turn it into something more. And these guys are sophisticated, right? So that's where you need MDR, right? Because your only hope of catching this, it is not going to be an alert. Your firewall's not going to go, hey, there's something bad. It's not your antivirus that's going to kick it out going, I've seen this malware before. It is going to be inferential signs that people are inside your environment, new accounts that have been created. Nobody knows why, they can't reconcile that to a department, or their credentials and their authority, their privileges being escalated. Right. And so suddenly it's like, why do we all have IT admin level clearance? We shouldn't have that, failed login attempts, files moving around, duplication, bandwidth changes, overnight, like normally you're closed, in the middle of the night because you're not doing 24/7 global business. But all of a sudden, there's a lot of traffic at 2 a.m., things like that, right? It's all those little signs. So there's never going to be the one, you don't get the smoking gun with the video footage and the confession. It's always going to be more subtle little things, circumstantial things. That's what MDR is supposed to do, right? They're supposed to go in, put all those pieces together. They suddenly get a bigger picture of what's happening, and then they got to do something about it. That's where I think they make the difference. That is at least a counter, it's going to slow down these criminals enough for you to figure out what's going on.
I tell you what, you helped us all understand MDR much better and much clearer, and at least it's in my mind. And you put a pretty fine point, an exclamation point on with your stories as to how this can impact you and really upset your apple cart. So protect yourself. Otherwise, you'll be getting ready to jump a plane and take $5 million in cash to Russia and try to track people down. It looks good in the movies, but in real life, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I also learned that if you ever want to have a mid-career correction, you can always go into the other side. So you're wonderful to have as a guest, but you could be scary if you went on the other side of the table.
Absolutely, right. I just love the way you described you described all of that. So yeah, you can make 10 to 15 times the amount of money that you would probably in a legit square business then or job if you go over to the dark side. So you can understand from a financial perspective why it's lucrative, right? There is an allure.
But I also learned that you're in like 6 or 7 hedge funds, so you really don't need the money. So that's the good news.
No. Exactly. I'll just retreat to my private island and my bunker and survive.
Well, once again, fabulous conversation. But if you have one additional thing that our audience could do today, what would that one thing be to help them become more secure?
Yeah, really understand the threats and know what you got to do about them. What are your obligations, regardless of your business or your industry, right? I think that's it. Open your eyes. Know it's the bump in the night means there is somebody in your house.
Well, Mark, thanks for coming back to tell us these beautiful stories. I mean, I don't know if they're beautiful stories, but they're very entertaining and really bring home your points as to the need for MDR and whatever form it is. But MDR service sounds very tempting. If I have a small business, I'd like to protect myself. So you are welcome back anytime, sir. And we really appreciate your contribution to the Safe House Initiative.
Hey, you're really welcome, Jeff. And you got a great forum here. So anytime you want me back, it's my pleasure.
That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the Safe House Initiative. Thanks for joining us. And remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information about the Safe House Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen or send us an email at info@safehouseinitiative.org or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.